In a small, quiet town on the outskirts of Calabar, there was an old boarding school called Ekanem Hall, with peeling paint, creaking wood, and windows that rattled even on calm nights. Locals avoided the place after dark, and students who lived there swore the school was haunted. Everyone knew the tale of Madame Udo, the strict, watchful headmistress who'd vanished mysteriously decades ago on a stormy night. The rumor was that she still roamed the school, searching for her lost children. Some students said if you stayed late enough, you'd hear her footsteps echoing down the empty halls, as if her spirit hadn't yet found peace. Ada, a daring senior at Ekanem Hall, loved testing limits. Known for her courage, she found the ghost stories ridiculous and was always challenging anyone who mentioned them. One evening, as her friends recounted the tale of Madame Udo, Ada rolled her eyes. "These stories are just meant to scare us," she laughed. "I bet if I stayed overnight in the library, Madame Udo would still leave me alone." Her friends exchanged nervous glances. "Ada, it's not worth it," one of them whispered. "People have tried before. Some say they saw things, and no one's ever made it through the night alone." But Ada only smirked. "Fine, then I'll prove all of you wrong. I'll spend the night in the library and come back in the morning with proof there's nothing here but dust and old books." As midnight approached, Ada snuck into the library with a flashlight, a blanket, and her phone, promising her friends she'd be back by sunrise. The library was massive, filled with rows of ancient books, dusty shelves, and chairs with faded upholstery. The air was thick with the scent of old paper and mildew, and the only sound was the wind howling outside, making the windows rattle in their frames. She settled into one of the big, creaky chairs and wrapped herself in her blanket. As the hours passed, the school fell silent, and she felt a strange tension in the air. Every once in a while, she'd hear the floor creak or a soft thud, but she brushed it off as the sounds of an old building settling at night. Around 1 in the morning, Ada began to feel uneasy. It was then that she heard it, a soft, slow shuffling in the hallway outside. Her heart skipped a beat, but she forced herself to stay calm, laughing quietly to herself. "It's probably just the wind," she muttered, though even she didn't quite believe it. Then came the footsteps, faint but unmistakable. They moved with a slow, deliberate rhythm, each step echoing closer. Ada tried to ignore it, focusing on her phone, but the sound grew louder and seemed to stop right outside the library door. She held her breath, her heart pounding. Just as she was about to convince herself it was her imagination, she heard the door creak open. She looked up, flashlight in hand, but saw nothing. "Stop it, Ada. It's just an old door," she whispered, trying to convince herself. But then, out of the corner of her eye, she saw it. A figure standing by the far bookshelf. The figure was tall and shadowy, and as her eyes adjusted, she saw it was a woman dressed in an old-fashioned blouse and skirt, with a severe expression and piercing eyes. It was Madame Udo, and her gaze was locked on Ada. Ada's blood ran cold. The headmistress's face was stern, almost angry, as though she were silently scolding her for breaking the rules. Slowly, Madame Udo lifted a hand and pointed directly at Ada. The room went deathly cold, and Ada felt a tight grip around her wrist, as if an invisible hand was holding her. Panicking, Ada tried to pull away, but her limbs felt heavy. The flashlight flickered, casting eerie shadows across the room. The headmistress's eyes seemed to glow faintly, and Ada swore she could hear a faint whisper, like children murmuring all around her. Then she felt it, a small hand brushing against her shoulder. Startled, she turned, only to see the faint outlines of children, her age or younger, with hollow, blank faces and empty eyes. They stood in a loose circle around her, watching her in silence, their mouths moving as if whispering something she couldn't quite make out. She forced herself to look away, mumbling to herself, "This isn't real. It's not real." But the whispering grew louder, and the children began moving closer, their expressions empty and hollow. Suddenly, one child stepped forward, his eyes wide and staring. He looked up at her and whispered, "Help us. She won't let us leave." Ada's heart pounded. her skin prickling with fear. She turned back to Madame Udo, who was still pointing at her, a look of cold rage in her eyes. Ada stumbled backward, desperate to escape, but each time she tried to move, the circle of children tightened around her, as if they were trying to keep her there. In a desperate attempt, she shut her eyes and whispered, "Please, just let me go." A soft laugh echoed through the room, a sound like rustling leaves. Madame Udo's voice filled the air, cold and chilling. "You came here on your own, child," she whispered. "Once you enter Ekanem Hall after dark, you belong to me." The grip around her wrist tightened, and Ada felt herself being pulled backward into the darkness. She struggled, screaming, but the children's whispers only grew louder, their voices overlapping, creating a horrifying chorus. Just as she felt herself slipping, her phone buzzed in her pocket, the screen lighting up with her friends' names. She reached for it, but her hand passed right through the phone as if she were already fading away. With one last scream, she felt herself being pulled into the shadowy corner of the library, disappearing into the darkness. The next morning, her friends came looking for her, but all they found were her belongings neatly folded on the chair. Ada had vanished without a trace. Weeks passed, and the school returned to its routine, but strange things began happening in the library. Late at night, students studying in the library would hear faint whispers or catch a glimpse of a girl sitting in the shadows, her eyes wide with terror, mouthing silent pleas for help. The students soon realized it was Ada, forever trapped within the haunted walls of Ekanem Hall. Her spirit joining the lost children Madame Udo kept close. Now, if you walk by the library late at night, you might just hear her voice among the others, whispering, "Help me, don't leave me here."
Thanks for watching. Don't forget to subscribe.